Have you ever wondered what happens when a single act of kindness changes everything? When a struggling single father opens the door on a snowy night and finds a young woman collapsed with 2 babies in her arms. She doesn't say much. She barely speaks at all, but days later, after she disappears, he finds a letter that reveals who she truly is and why she chose him. This isn't just a story about chance. It's a story about love that grows in quiet places, about healing from what we've lost, and about how sometimes the family we chooses us right back. If you love heartfelt stories that restore your faith in people, you're in the right place. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story that might just stay with you long after the last word. Now, take a breath, settle in. Let me tell you the story of the table by the window. The snow fell like a whisper over Elk Hollow, Nebraska, soft and steady, blanketing the town in a hush that made everything seem farther away than it was. The few streetlights along Main Street flickered under the weight of frost, and the buildings, all brick and time-worn wood, looked like relics from a forgotten decade. Inside a weather-beaten garage just off the main road, a man in his 30s stood with grease-stained hands and a face half-lit by the dim glow of a hanging work lamp. His name was Cal Morgan, and everything he owned was either second-hand or rusting, including the dreams he no longer admitted to having. He wiped his hands on the rag that had seen better days and glanced at the clock above the door. 7:23 p.m. Most folks were home with warm meals and familiar voices. Cal was still under the hood of a '98 pickup that wouldn't start, no matter how many times he coaxed it. Outside, the wind picked up, making the loose metal siding creak like old bones. "All right, girl," he muttered to the truck, tapping the side of the hood. "You and I can try again tomorrow." He shut the hood gently, as if not to offend it further, and made his way to the small office space in the back. It wasn't much, just a desk cluttered with unpaid bills, a battered coffee pot, and a faded photograph of a smiling woman holding a baby boy. Cal's eyes lingered on it. His wife, Mara, had been gone nearly 4 years, but her absence still filled every corner of the place. And the boy, Eli, was now 8, with eyes like hers, and questions Cal didn't always know how to answer. He rubbed the back of his neck and switched off the overhead light. Time to head home. But as he stepped outside, the bitter wind slapped his face, and he instinctively pulled his jacket tighter. The snow had thickened, turning the world into a blur of white and shadow. Just as he was locking the garage door, a flicker of movement caught his eye near the gas station next door, barely visible under the buzzing fluorescent lights. At first, he thought it was trash blown by the wind. Then he saw it again, a small shape collapsing near the dumpster, followed by a strange bundle lying motionless beside it. Cal didn't think. He ran. As he approached, his boots crunching through the fresh snow, he saw a young woman slumped against the metal bin, her head bowed, her arms curled around what looked like 2 small forms wrapped in a tattered blanket. "Hey!" he called, crouching down. "Are you all right?" No response. Her face was pale, lips tinged blue, hair damp with frost. One of the bundles stirred. A baby, barely more than a few months old, eyes wide with confusion and cold. "Jesus," Callie whispered. He didn't ask questions. He didn't weigh the risks. He just acted. Back in the garage, the heat hadn't kicked in fully, but it was better than outside. Cal laid the woman down gently on an old sofa in the office, pulling every spare blanket he could find around her. The 2 babies, twins, he realized now, were still clinging to each other, cheeks red and tiny hands trembling. He rushed to the back closet and found a space heater, kicking it to life with a clunk. It sputtered, but the warm air began to push back the chill. He poured water into a kettle, set it on a hot plate, and scrounged through the snack stash for anything soft enough for infants, eventually settling on powdered formula left by a customer months ago. Maybe expired, maybe not, but it was better than nothing. One of the babies whimpered, and Cal, who hadn't held a child since Eli had grown too big to carry, scooped him up with surprising ease. His fingers were clumsy, but the motion came back to him like an old song. "You've got lungs, I'll give you that," he murmured, rocking gently. "Let's get you warm." The girl stirred then, eyes fluttering open, confused and dazed. "Where?" she croaked. "You're safe," Cal said, kneeling beside her. "You fainted outside the station. I brought you in, you and the babies." She looked at him with wide, glassy eyes, then at her children, who were now swaddled and quiet beside the heater. A tear slipped down her cheek, but she didn't speak, only nodded once. Small, almost imperceptible. Cal stood and gave her space. "You can rest here tonight, I'll keep the heater going. If you need anything, just holler. My name's Cal." No reply came, but she pulled the babies closer, her hands trembling as they smoothed down their blankets. Cal didn't ask for names. He didn't press for explanations. Something in her eyes told him she'd had enough questions for a lifetime. Later that night, after he'd checked on her again and found all three asleep under the dim lamplight, he drove the short distance home to Eli. The boy was curled on the couch with a book, the dog snoring at his feet. "You're late," Eli mumbled. "Had something come up at the shop?" Eli looked at him, sleepy but curious. "You okay?" Cal smiled faintly. "Yeah, kiddo. Just reminded tonight that people still need each other." And for the first time in a long while, Cal didn't feel like the weight of the world was his alone to carry. Somewhere in that cold night, something had shifted. Something had begun. The sun broke gently over Elk Hollow the next morning, casting long shadows across the snow-blanketed rooftops. The cold hadn't let up, but the sky had softened into a pale blue, the kind that made everything look just a little more hopeful. Inside, their modest two-bedroom home above the garage, Eli Morgan sat at the small kitchen table, legs swinging, spooning oatmeal from a chipped ceramic bowl. His dark hair stuck up in uneven tufts, evidence of a restless night's sleep. He glanced toward the door as it creaked open and his father stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cold. "You smell like oil and snow," Eli said matter-of-factly. Cal chuckled, shrugging off his jacket. "Nice to see you too, buddy." Eli's eyes followed him, observant beyond his years. "You didn't sleep here last night?" "Nope." Cal poured himself a cup of coffee, careful to keep his tone light. "Something came up at the shop. Someone needed help." Eli tilted his head. "Was it a stranded truck?" "No." Cal paused. "It was a person, a girl, with 2 babies." Eli's spoon stopped midair. "Real babies? Real as you," Cal said, sitting across from him. "Found them outside, cold and alone. I brought them into the garage to warm up." Eli blinked. "Like a rescue?" Cal smiled. "Sort of." Eli considered that. "Are they still there?" "They were sleeping when I left," Cal said quietly. "Didn't have anywhere else to go." Eli stared into his bowl for a moment, then pushed it aside. "Can I meet them?" Cal studied. His son. There was no fear in Eli's eyes, no hesitation, just curiosity and something else, something gentler. "Maybe later," he said. "Let's give them time." Eli nodded, already picturing what they might look like. "Do you think they're okay now?" "I hope so," Cal said. "It's going to take more than one warm night to fix whatever they've been through." Eli had always been different from other boys his age. Quieter, more thoughtful. Teachers called him an old soul, and Cal, though never sure what that meant exactly, suspected it had something to do with how much Eli had already learned about loss. He was only 4 when Mara died, young enough not to understand the word cancer, but old enough to feel the hole she left behind. In the years that followed, Cal tried to fill the silence with stability, routines, warm meals, a roof that didn't leak. But Eli noticed things. He always had. That morning, as Cal returned to the garage with a paper bag of groceries, Eli stayed, behind, helping the dog, an elderly mutt named Rufus, navigate the icy porch steps. "You're gonna slip again, you stubborn old thing," he muttered, holding the leash tight. Back inside, Eli sat at the window, peering out across the alley, waiting for a sign. He didn't know why, but something about what his father had said lingered. A girl, 2 babies, cold, alone. The words wrapped around his chest and tugged gently. He knew what it felt like to be lonely. He wondered if the babies knew they'd been saved. He got up and rummaged through the hallway closet, pulling out one of his favorite stuffed animals, a threadbare blue rabbit named Toby. He hadn't played with it in over a year, but it still smelled like safety. Eli pressed it to, his chest thinking. Meanwhile, Cal stepped quietly back into the garage. The heater was still humming in the office corner. Mira was awake, sitting up now, the babies nestled against her sides as she sipped from a paper cup of water. She looked better, less pale, though her eyes still held shadows that hadn't slept in weeks. "Morning," Cal said gently. She nodded. "Thank you for last night." He waved it off. "Don't mention it." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. In fact, it felt oddly natural. 2 people sitting in the same room, understanding that words weren't always necessary. "I brought some food," he said, placing the bag near the couch. "There's oatmeal, fruit, and formula. Not much, but it's perfect," she interrupted, voice soft. "I haven't eaten in 2 days." He looked at her carefully. "Do you want to tell me anything, or would you rather not?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Not yet." "Fair enough." One of the babies began to fuss, and Mira turned her full attention to the child, rocking him gently. The sight tugged at Cal in ways he didn't expect. It had been so long since he'd seen someone cradle a baby like that. The motions were instinctive, protective. She was clearly their mother, even if she looked like she'd barely slept in weeks. "Boy or girl?" he asked quietly. "Both boys," she replied, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "Jude and Micah." Cal nodded, memorizing the names. "You're welcome to stay another night if you need." She looked up, wary. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." He didn't have a good answer, only the truth. "Because I hope someone would have done the same if it were Eli and me out there." Her eyes softened. She looked toward the heater, as if unsure what to do with the warmth growing in her chest. Back at the house, Eli sat with Toby the rabbit on his lap, still watching the garage from the window. When he saw his dad return, he met him at the door. "Did the babies cry?" "A little." "Do they have names?" "Jude and Micah," Eli smiled. "Good names." He held up the rabbit. "Can I give them this? They might feel safer." Cal knelt down, taking in his son's face, so earnest, so open. "You?" "Sure," he asked. Eli nodded. "Toby's helped me sleep since Mommy left. Maybe he can help them too." Cal swallowed hard, overcome by the quiet strength in the boy before him. "Yeah, bud," he said softly. "I think that's a beautiful idea." The garage creaked in the cold. It was early evening, and the sky was already darkening to slate. Snow tapped gently against the windows, more like static than a storm, the kind of weather that wrapped the town of Elk Hollow in a hush. The roads were mostly empty, the world huddled indoors, and it might have been, should have been, just another quiet night. Inside the office of the old garage, Mira sat on the couch with her knees drawn up, a worn blanket draped over her shoulders. Her sons, Jude and Micah, were asleep in a makeshift bed of blankets and towels near the heater, their tiny chests rising and falling in sync. She had fed them earlier with formula Cal had brought, and now their bellies were full, their faces pink from warmth. It had been a long time since she'd seen them look that peaceful. She watched them for a moment longer, then closed her eyes. She didn't let herself rest, not really, but she drifted in that quiet space, just shy of sleep, where her mind stayed alert to every sound. The hum of the heater, the wind outside, and now the soft clink of tools from the other room. He hadn't left. Cal Morgan was still working on something in the garage bay, and that surprised her. Most people would have helped her for one night, then handed her off to someone else. But he hadn't asked for details. He hadn't demanded anything. He hadn't looked at her like she was a problem. Mira sat up slowly and peered out through the glass door that separated the office from the rest of the garage. Cal was on the floor beside a half-dismantled generator, his sleeves rolled up, hands moving with quiet purpose. It was late, and he'd been working since morning, but he moved like a man who was used to labor, used to noise and solitude. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself and stepped quietly into the room. Cal looked up but didn't speak right away. His gaze flicked toward her, then back to the engine. "You should be resting." "I couldn't sleep," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, tightening a bolt. "Baby's okay?" "They're fine." She paused. "Thank you again for the food, for the heat, for everything." Cal set the wrench down and leaned back on his heels. "You don't have to thank me." Mira looked at him, really looked this time. His face was worn, lined with the kind of tiredness that came from years of responsibility. His eyes were gentle but guarded, and yet there was something in them, a steadiness that made her feel safer than she'd felt in a long, long time. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "Garage belonged to my dad," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "I grew up around here, worked on engines with him since I was Eli's age. After he passed, I kept it running." "And Eli's your son?" she asked, though she already knew. Cal nodded. "He's 8. Sharp kid, too sharp sometimes." Mira managed a faint smile. "He's kind. Gave the boys his stuffed rabbit today." Cal's lips curved slightly. "Yeah, that sounds like him." There was a pause, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Mira hesitated. Then, almost without meaning to, she whispered, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." Cal met her eyes, but didn't press. She swallowed hard. "I left because I had to, not because I wanted to." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes leaving is the only choice that isn't worse." She looked at him, surprised, maybe even relieved, to find no judgment there, just quiet understanding. "I don't know where I'm going next," she admitted. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," Cal said simply. She wanted to ask why he was being kind, why he hadn't turned her away, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't ready to be vulnerable, not yet, not with the whole world still pressing down on her chest. Instead, she nodded. "I should check on them." Cal gave a slight wave of his hand, as if to say, "You know where to find me." Later that night, Cal turned off the lights in the garage one by one, leaving only the glow from the office heater casting shadows across the walls. He stood for a long moment by the door, listening to the wind swirl outside. The forecast had called for more snow overnight. He wasn't sure what he was doing, harboring a stranger, 2 infants, no plan in sight, but something inside him told him not to worry about the logic of it. Some things weren't about making sense. They were about doing the right thing. As he slipped on his coat and headed out to the house, the moon hung low and full above the rooftops. He could see the faint glow of his home's porch light through the snowfall. Inside, Eli was already asleep, curled beneath a quilt that had once belonged to Mara. Cal stood at the foot of his bed for a moment, watching his son breathe. He thought about how much Eli had lost, and how little he ever complained. Maybe that was why it had felt so easy to open the door to Mira and her boys. Because Cal knew what it meant to be left without a safety net. In the stillness, he felt the weight of everything. His debts, the garage barely holding on, the ache of Mara's memory, but also something else. Something softer. Hope. Maybe not quite, but something that looked a little like it. Back in the garage, Mira stood at the office window, watching snowflakes swirl beneath the flickering street lamp. Her sons were asleep again, and the room smelled faintly of motor oil, warm blankets, and safety. She didn't know where she would go next, didn't know if she would be found, but tonight she and her children were warm, alive, seen, and somehow that was enough. Just another night. But not really. By morning, the snow had thickened into a soft, heavy silence, the kind of quiet that made time feel suspended, like the whole world was holding its breath. In the back office of the garage, Mira stirred slowly. Her body ached from sleeping on the lumpy old couch, but it was the most comfort she'd felt in weeks. Her hands reached instinctively toward the two small bundles beside her, and when her fingers met the warmth of Jude and Micah's sleeping forms, she let out a shaky breath she hadn't even realized she was holding. They were still here. Still. Safe. The heater hummed low nearby, filling the room with a constant, reassuring rhythm. Mira lay still for a moment, watching her sons. Jude's mouth was parted slightly, one tiny fist curled beneath his chin. Micah's head was tucked close to his brother's, their bodies curved together in that unspoken way twins often had, like two parts of a whole, refusing to let go. It had been 3 weeks since Mira had last slept without fearing the cold would steal them in the night. 3 weeks of drifting from bus stations to borrowed couches to the backs of rest stops, clutching her babies tighter with each passing hour, hoping no one asked questions, hoping no one recognized her face. And now she was here, in the garage that smelled of old engines and quiet decency, in the care of a man who hadn't asked a single question about her past. A man who had made space for them, not just physically, but emotionally too. She hadn't expected kindness. She certainly hadn't expected gentleness, but Cal Morgan had offered both. The doorknob turned softly, and Mira sat up, pulling the blanket higher. "It's just me," Cal said gently, stepping in with a brown paper bag. "Didn't mean to scare you." She relaxed slightly. Her hair was still tangled, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, but she gave him the smallest nod. "Morning. Got a few things from the store. Nothing fancy, but figured it'd help." He set the bag down near the couch. "Formula, some fruit. There's applesauce, too. Figured that works for everybody." Mira managed a whisper of a smile. "Thank you." He rubbed the back of his neck. "No problem. How are the boys?" "Warm," she said. "Sleeping. Good. That's something." She looked up at him, studying his face. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, the kind that only showed on people who didn't rest enough. The stubble on his chin had grown more rugged overnight, and grease smudged one side of his flannel sleeve. But none of it made him seem tired. He looked present, grounded, real. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. The words slipped out before she could think. "For what?" he asked, brow furrowing. "For ending up here, for needing help." Cal blinked, then shook his head. "You don't have to apologize for needing a place to keep your kids alive." Mira swallowed hard. Her throat tightened, and for a second she looked away. "You didn't ask anything," she said quietly. "Not even my last name." "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." She studied him for a long moment. He didn't fill the silence with nervous chatter. He didn't shift uncomfortably or press her. He simply stood there like someone used to waiting, but never walking away. "I used to think there weren't people like you anymore," she murmured. "People who just help." "I'm not a saint," Cal said with a small shrug. "I'm just a guy who knows what it's like to lose things." That made her look at him, really look. He met her gaze steadily, and something unspoken passed between them. Not a revelation, not quite understanding, but a fragile tether forming in the quiet. After a long pause, Mira's voice softened. "You have a son, Eli?" Cal nodded. "Yeah, 8 going on 30. Smart kid." He gave Micah his rabbit. A beat passed. Cal smiled. "Toby?" Mira nodded. "That was his name?" "Yup. Had him since he was a toddler." I offered to get him back, but he told me the babies needed it more than he did. That's rare, she whispered, in a kid that age. He lost his mom young. It made him see things differently. Her expression faltered. I'm sorry. Me too, Cal said, and somehow the words didn't feel heavy, just true. Later that day, after she'd helped feed the twins and managed a short hot shower in the garage's tiny back bathroom, Mira stepped outside for the first time since that night. The snow had slowed, leaving the streets wet and glistening beneath the pale sky. The town was quiet, but not deserted. Across the street, a diner had its open sign glowing faintly in the window. A few cars passed here and there, drivers bundled in scarves, heads down against the wind. She felt the chill bite into her skin instantly, but she needed to breathe, to remember she was alive, to believe that this strange moment of safety wasn't just a dream she'd wake from. Behind her, the garage door creaked open, and Cal stepped out with a steaming mug of coffee in each hand. Cold. Morning for a walk, he said, offering her one. Not walking, she replied, accepting the mug. Just standing still. He stood beside her in silence, not prying, not rushing her. They sipped coffee, watching snow melt in slow rivulets along the curb. After a moment, Mira turned to him. I don't know how long I can stay. You can stay as long as you need. Her throat tightened. You don't even know what you're getting into. Cal looked at her, steady and quiet. Maybe not, but I know what it looks like when someone's running because they're trying to protect the people they love. She blinked back, the sting in her eyes. I'm not trying to take advantage, she whispered. I know, he said. You're just trying to survive. And for the first time in weeks, maybe months, Mira didn't feel like a fugitive. She felt like a mother, a person, someone seen. The twins were asleep again, nestled on the couch in the garage office beneath layers of towels, flannel, and love. The space was still dim, warmed only by the gentle hum of the electric heater and the faint scent of motor oil clinging to every corner. Outside, the wind rattled the siding with occasional sighs, like a world just beyond the walls trying to remind them it still existed. Mira sat nearby in an old folding chair Cal had brought in, her hands cradling a warm mug of tea he'd offered earlier that morning. Her eyes, heavy from too many sleepless nights, kept flickering toward the babies, as if to confirm they were still breathing. She hadn't spoken much since their conversation outside, but something had shifted in her. The walls were still up, but not as high. Cal, respectful of the quiet, had busied himself with a few small repairs on the generator in the back room, giving her space, but not distance. When he returned a while later, wiping grease off his hands, Mira didn't flinch this time. She looked up, eyes meeting his with something cautious but steady. I never thanked you properly, she said softly. You don't have to, Cal replied, placing his tools on a nearby shelf. I do, she insisted. Not just for the food or warmth, but for not asking questions. He gave a small nod, folding his arms across his chest, leaning back against the workbench. I figured you had your reasons. I did, she said. Her voice was quiet, but clear. Still do. Cal didn't press her, just waited. My name is Mira, she said after a pause. Mira Holloway. The name hung in the air for a beat too long. Cal's brows drew together subtly, not in recognition, but in something close to memory. Holloway. The name tugged at a place in his mind he hadn't visited in a while, but he said nothing. Mira continued, I haven't said that name out loud in weeks, maybe months. It doesn't feel like mine anymore. Why? Cal asked gently. She looked down into her tea, fingers tightening around the mug. Because it comes with a past I'm not ready to carry again. Another long pause. The heater ticked softly, like a clock in a room that refused to hurry anyone. I grew up not far from here, she said. But it might as well have been another country. My father, Richard Holloway, owned a lot of property. Businesses, gas stations, A couple of service centers, Cal stilled, the name falling into place now like the last piece of a puzzle. Richard Holloway, the man who, a decade ago, had opened 3 branded service stations within a 10-mile radius of Cal's father's garage, crushing their family business with corporate competition and long hours, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He remembered the arguments at home, the bills, the way his father tried to keep up until his body gave out, until Cal took over and just barely held on. But Cal said none of this, because the woman in front of him wasn't that man. And right now she looked more like a girl who'd walked away from every comfortable thing she'd ever known. I ran from it, Mira said, her voice thinner now. From all of it. From a life I never chose. Cal leaned forward slightly. What happened? She hesitated, then met his gaze. My father died last spring, heart attack, left me everything, and with it, all the strings he never stopped pulling. Cal didn't move, but inside he felt a strange mixture of sympathy and restraint. I tried to walk away, she said, but the people around me, his old partners, investors, lawyers, they wouldn't let go. And then there was Ethan. She paused. Cal waited. He was my father's protégé, she said flatly. Charming, polished, and dangerous in all the ways you can't prove until it's too late. My father pushed me toward him, said Ethan would protect the family legacy. Her fingers tightened on the mug. Ethan didn't want a partner. He wanted an accessory, something to control. And when I finally said no, things got ugly. Cal's jaw tensed. Did he hurt you? Mira didn't answer directly. Let's just say I left before he could finish the job. She looked over. At the twins again. Her voice cracked. They were only 4 months old. I didn't have time to plan. I packed a bag, grabbed them, and got in the car. I drove until I ran out of gas money, and then I walked. Cal was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, but laced with something solid. You did the right thing. Her shoulders trembled slightly. She blinked fast, trying not to let the emotion show, but it was too close to the surface now. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get them away. You saved them, he said. I don't feel like a hero, she whispered. You don't have to. They sat there, 2 people from different pasts, both wounded, by the same last name. And in that stillness, there was something almost holy, like forgiveness beginning before anyone asked for it. Finally, Mira exhaled. I don't expect you to believe me, or trust me. Cal shook his head slowly. Mira, I don't know much, but I know what it looks like when someone's barely holding on. I've been there. She looked up at him, the weight of months on. Her face. I don't have a plan, she said. You don't need one tonight. He stood and walked toward the back door, pausing to flick on the garage's exterior light. The snow had begun again, soft, slow flakes drifting like quiet thoughts across the dark. You and the boys can stay as long as you need, he added, without looking back. Mira sat in silence, watching him disappear into the shadows. And for the first time in a long, long while, she didn't feel like she was running. The storm outside didn't scream. It whispered. It brushed its fingers against the windows and rattled the eaves of the garage with a steady patience, like it knew the people inside weren't going anywhere. It was the kind of cold that settled deep in the bones. But inside the office of Cal Morgan's garage, warmth lingered in more than just the air. There was warmth in the quiet. And lately, quiet didn't mean loneliness. Not tonight. Cal sat at his workbench near the far wall, sipping a mug of coffee gone lukewarm. The tools were neatly arranged for once, not because he was done with them, but because he needed a reason to pause. Across the room, through the open office doorway, he could see Mira sitting cross-legged on the worn couch, one baby on her lap, the other cradled in a second-hand bassinet he'd pulled down from his attic that morning. Eli sat on the floor nearby, leaning against the wall, gently rocking one foot in rhythm with a soft lullaby Mira was humming. The tune was faint, barely above a whisper, but it filled the room like the scent of fresh bread or the memory of something good. It was the first time Cal had heard her sing. There was no performance in it, no polish, just tenderness. He hadn't planned to bring Eli into the garage that evening. School was cancelled due to snow, and the house had felt restless with too much silence. Eli had asked, "Can we go see the babies?" And Cal hadn't found a reason to say no. Mira hadn't objected either. In fact, she'd smiled, an actual, honest-to-God smile, when Eli offered to hold Jude's tiny hand with a reverence usually reserved for miracles. Cal took another sip of coffee and leaned back in his chair. For a long time, his world had been small, predictable, wake up, work, worry, sleep, repeat. But this was new, strange, soft, not just survival. Something closer to living. "Micah drooled on my shirt," Eli announced suddenly, breaking the silence. Mira laughed, a short musical sound that surprised them both. She looked over at Cal. "He's a drooler. I tried to warn you." Cal raised a brow. "We accept all kinds here." Eli grinned proudly. "It's okay. Rufus drools worse." "Rufus?" Mira asked. "Our dog," Eli replied. "He's really old and kind of smelly." Mira's laughter came easier this time, and Cal couldn't help but marvel at the way her entire face changed when she wasn't carrying the weight of fear. It was like watching a frozen lake crack open in spring, not loud, not fast, but deeply, irreversibly. She turned toward Cal with a gentler expression. "Thank you for letting him come by. He's kind." Cal nodded. "He got that from his mom." Her gaze didn't drop this time. "You talk about her like she's still in the room." "She is sometimes," he said softly. "Not in the way people mean it, just in the way Eli laughs, the way he worries about other people, the way he hands over his favorite rabbit without blinking." Mira looked down. "He's a special kid." Cal smiled faintly. "I've been told that. Still doesn't make it easier figuring out how to raise him right." "You're doing all right," she said, and then quietly, as if to herself, "more than all right." Later that evening, Mira offered to wash the baby bottles while Cal prepped. Some grilled cheese sandwiches on the hot plate. The space wasn't meant for cooking, but Cal had made do with worse. Mira's sleeves were rolled up, and her hair was tied back, strands escaping in soft waves. She moved around the tiny sink with practiced care, not as a guest, not as a fugitive, but as someone who felt, even for a moment, like she belonged. Eli was reading a dog-eared comic book on the couch beside Jude and Micah. Every few pages, he'd pause to glance at them, as if silently promising to stand guard. "I haven't cooked in weeks," Mira said, drying her hands. Cal handed her a plate. "It's not exactly gourmet." She took a bite and smiled. "It's perfect." There was something fragile about the moment, as though any sudden move would shatter it. And yet, it held. "You ever think," Mira said between bites, "how strange it is that peace can show up in the middle of everything falling apart?" "All the time," Cal said. They sat in companionable silence for a while, chewing slowly, listening to the wind press gently against the walls. Then Mira asked, the question she hadn't dared speak until now, "Why did you help me?" Cal looked at her. "Not surprised, not defensive, just quiet. Because you needed help," he said simply. "And I've needed it before too. That kind of hunger, the kind that has nothing to do with food. You can see it in someone's eyes." Mira looked down at her plate, blinking hard. "You didn't look away," she said. "No," Cal replied, "and I won't." That night, Cal let Eli fall asleep on the office cot beside the babies, Rufus curled up at his feet, tail thumping in a slow, lazy rhythm. Mira sat in the desk chair, arms crossed over her chest, watching the soft rise and fall of her son's breath. Cal leaned against the doorframe, the low light behind him casting his shadow long across the floor. "You should get some sleep," he said. "I will," she replied, though she didn't move. "Safe here, you know," she nodded. "I know. Strange, isn't it?" "What?" He glanced toward the couch where Eli slept, Toby the rabbit nestled under his arm. how fast something can stop feeling temporary. Mira's lips parted, but no answer came. Because the truth was, it was strange. This wasn't home. This wasn't her life. But it didn't feel like hiding either. For the first time since she'd fled, she wasn't checking windows or planning exits. She was simply here. The world was still when Mira woke. No alarms, no knocking, no raised voices. Just the soft hush of breath from 3 sleeping children, and the quiet crackle of the old space heater still humming in the corner. The night hadn't lifted yet, but the edges of the dark were beginning to give way. Like the slow turn of a page, she sat up slowly, careful not to wake the babies. Eli was curled up beside them, Toby the rabbit tucked beneath his chin, and Rufus sprawled at the foot of the cot like a guardian who took his job very seriously. Mira pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her shoulders and rose, barefoot, on the cold floor, stepping out into the garage bay. The main work area was dimly lit by a single lamp hanging above Cal's workbench. It cast a soft yellow halo over the cluttered tools and grease-stained rags, but the rest of the room was wrapped in shadow. A familiar silhouette leaned against the hood of a beat-up Chevy, arms folded, sipping something from a metal thermos. "You're up early," Cal said, his voice low and even, like he didn't want to wake the sleeping peace behind her. Mira gave a small nod. "Didn't sleep much." He offered her a cup. She accepted, warming her hands around it before even bringing it to her lips. They stood there for a moment, watching the snow drift gently through the garage's dusty windows. "I used to be afraid of mornings," she said softly. They meant waking up to the same problems, the same fears, another day to outrun. Cal didn't respond right away. He sipped his coffee, then said, "You don't seem like you're running anymore." "I don't feel like I am," she admitted. "But I haven't stopped looking over my shoulder either." "You will," he said, "in time." She looked at him, trying to read the man who kept offering steady truths without asking for anything in return. "You believe in time that much?" "I believe in what people do with it," he replied. "How they use it to heal, to forgive, to change." Mira turned her gaze back to the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to shift, a pale lavender creeping along the edges of the dark. It wasn't dawn yet, but it was close. "I keep thinking this will all break," she said. "Like a glass I'm holding too tightly. I'll wake up and find it wasn't real." Cal's voice was quiet. "It's real, Mira. How do you—" "No," he didn't hesitate. "Because what's happening here, it doesn't feel like charity or duty. It feels like something choosing to stay." Her breath caught. She stared at him, heart thudding too fast, too loud. She hadn't come here looking for connection. She'd come to survive. But somehow, in the flickering warmth of this old garage, something more had taken root. She turned away, blinking hard. "I don't know how to accept this kind of kindness," she said. "That's okay," Cal said gently. "It's not a transaction. You don't owe me a thing." Mira wrapped her arms around herself. "That's the hardest part." Cal stepped away from the truck, standing a few feet from her now. "People don't get to decide what you do with your pain. You get to choose. And you've been choosing to protect those boys every day. That matters." She met his eyes then, dark, steady, full of a quiet strength that didn't need to be explained, and something in her, fragile and buried deep, shifted. "Would it be okay," she asked softly, "if we stayed one more day?" Cal smiled. "You don't have to ask." Later that morning, after the sun finally breached the horizon and painted the sky with streaks of apricot and gold, the garage felt lighter. Cal cooked breakfast on the hot plate again, eggs, toast, some fruit, and Mira insisted on helping. She moved with more ease than before, humming quietly, while cutting apple slices and organizing the mismatched mugs they'd used the day before. Eli, wide-eyed with excitement, introduced Jude and Micah to each stuffed animal he owned. One by one, Mira watched the scene with something like wonder, as if she'd forgotten what a morning could look like when it wasn't wrapped in fear. "I think they like the dragon best," Eli said seriously, placing a green plush toy beside Micah's. "Tiny hand," Mira laughed. "They've got good taste." Cal watched the exchange from the doorway. His heart ached not with sorrow, but with something richer, something closer to hope. He could see how quickly a rhythm had begun to form, a way. Mira looked over at Eli, the way she folded the baby's blankets, just so. She hadn't stepped all the way in, but she was no longer standing at the threshold. "You don't have to cook, you know," he told her later, after she'd insisted on doing the dishes. "I know," she replied, rinsing a plate, "but I want to." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You've got a good instinct for normal." She smiled, not turning around. "I miss normal." "We all do." They shared a look then, brief but full. There was still so much unsaid between them, so much of her life that remained, in shadows, and so much of his still marked by grief. But for now, the silence was enough. That evening, just before putting the babies down, Mira sat near the heater and whispered something into each of their ears. Cal watched from across the room, pretending not to listen. But her voice, though soft, carried. "You are safe," she said to Micah. "You are brave," she said to Jude. "And Mama's still here." She looked up and her eyes met Cal's. "Do you think this can last?" His answer came without thinking. "If we let it." That night, before the sunrise returned again, Cal stood by the window and watched as snow began to fall again. Soft, silent and gentle. The world was still far from perfect, but for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel broken. It felt like the start of something worth staying for. The morning started like the others, a pot of coffee brewed in the corner, filling the garage with its quiet, nutty warmth. Outside, a thin layer of fresh snow glistened on the rooftops, untouched, like the world had pressed reset overnight. The twins had already stirred and fallen back asleep again, their tiny fists peeking out from under a blanket Mira had washed the day before. Eli was still in the house, sleeping in late after staying up past bedtime reading by flashlight, but something was different. Cal felt it the second he walked into the garage. The heater was still humming, the couch still rumpled, but the air had shifted, like something had been lifted, or taken. He glanced toward the office. No Mira. The bassinet was empty. The pile of diapers and formula near the desk was gone. So was the extra blanket. And her shoes, the pair with the broken lace, had disappeared from the corner near the door. He stood still, not moving, as if his body refused to believe what his eyes were telling him. Then he stepped toward the desk. A small brown envelope sat where she had been sitting the night before. It had no name on it, but he didn't need one. The weight of it, the curve of her handwriting, he knew it was for him. Cal picked it up slowly, holding it in both hands like something fragile, like it might shatter. He hesitated. Then he broke. The seal. To Cal and Eli, "I didn't want to wake you. I didn't want to say goodbye because I don't know how to explain something that's still messy inside me. I'm not running. Not the same way I was before. Please believe that. What you gave me, what Eli gave my boys, it was more than shelter. You gave me proof that good people still exist. But I also know I can't stay here. Not yet. I've lived most of my life with people deciding things for me, what I should be, where I should go, who I should love. And for the first time, I need to decide something on my own. That means leaving before I get too comfortable leaning on your kindness. Before I forget what it felt like to be strong. On my own, I don't expect you to understand. I'm not even sure I understand it fully myself. But please tell Eli thank you for the rabbit. Toby is tucked beside Micah as I write this. And thank you, Cal, for never asking me to be anyone other than who I was in that moment. I left something. For you, it's small, just a note with some details I hope might help. I'll explain in that too. I'll be okay. And I hope someday, when the time is right, we can meet again under different circumstances, without snow, without fear, with gratitude, Mira. Cal stood still for a long time after he finished the letter, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. His breath had caught somewhere between his ribs and didn't know how to leave again. She was gone, just like that. No final conversation. No goodbyes, just a letter, and a silence that rang louder than anything else. He sat down at the workbench, eyes burning but dry. There were so many things he wanted to ask, so many things he'd hoped they were building toward. He wasn't foolish, he hadn't let himself name it yet, but it was there, the hope, the possibility of something more. And now, the couch was empty, and the bassinet sat cold by the wall. He stared at the desk again. There was a folded sheet of paper tucked inside the envelope. Cal opened it slowly. What he saw made him sit up straighter. It was a bank account, opened under a name he didn't recognize, but there was a balance listed. Substantial, not absurd, not flashy, but enough to keep the garage running for a long time, enough to make repairs, pay debts, fix the leaking roof in the house. Beneath it, Mira had written in small, careful letters, "This came from my trust. My father never got to choose where it went, but I do. Use it if you want to, or don't. But you deserve more than just scraping by." Cal let the paper fall to the desk and exhaled slowly. It felt like someone had opened a window inside. Him, let in air he hadn't realized he needed. He didn't want her money. That wasn't why he'd helped. But somehow he wasn't offended. Not even close. He was moved. She had taken nothing and left behind something that could change everything. When Eli came down an hour later, rubbing sleep from his eyes, he paused in the office doorway. "Where's Mira?" he asked. Cal crouched, down beside him. "She left, Bud." Eli blinked. "Why?" "She needed to go find her own way," Cal said. "Some people need time to figure out who they are." Eli was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Did she take Toby?" Cal smiled gently. "Yeah, she said he's watching over Micah." Eli nodded once. "Okay, then I'm glad." Cal pulled him into a hug, tight, steady, silent. They stood there for a while, and though the garage was quiet, it didn't feel empty. Not really. That afternoon, Cal walked through every corner of the garage. He made a list, what needed fixing, what could be upgraded, what could finally be replaced. He didn't touch the money. Not yet. But he opened the account again and stared at it for a long time. She trusted him with a piece of her future. Not just the funds, but the faith behind it. And for Cal, that meant something more than any dollar ever could. That night, after Eli had gone to bed and Rufus had curled into a ball at the foot of the stairs, Cal sat on the porch with a cup of black coffee. The stars were beginning to peek out behind a curtain of clouds. He thought about Mira, her steady eyes, her tired smile, her quiet strength. He didn't know where she'd gone, but he knew she'd left a part of herself behind. In the boys. In that folded letter, in the silence that now filled the garage, not with absence, but with possibility. And for the first time in a very long while, Cal didn't feel like something had been taken from him. He felt like something had just begun. The letter sat on Cal's nightstand for 2 days before he opened it again, not because he didn't want to read it, but because he already had, and the words had sunk deep, lingering like a note in a quiet room long after the song ended. Still, something kept tugging at him, pulling him back to the folds of Mira's careful handwriting. There had been more than emotion in her words. There had been truth, unvarnished and unfinished, a thread he hadn't pulled yet. On the third evening, after Eli had gone to bed and the garage had gone still, Cal returned to the letter and unfolded it with the kind of care usually reserved for heirlooms. This time, he didn't skim, he read, and in the margin of the second page, something he hadn't noticed before, an added note, written in smaller, tighter script, almost like a whisper. I never told you this, but my father, Richard Holloway, used to own the land your garage stands on. Cal's breath caught. Before he sold it to your father, he tried to buy it back. When your dad refused, he swore he'd ruin him, and then he did. Cal stared at the words, his heart thudding with old familiar weight. So it was true. The suspicion he'd carried like a shadow all these years, the slow death of their family business under the pressure of Holloway service centers, the 3 new locations that opened within months of each other, the sudden drop in foot traffic. It wasn't a coincidence. Richard Holloway hadn't just outpaced them, he'd targeted them. He looked down at the next lines, written with visible hesitation. I'm sorry, I know this may hurt, but I needed you to know who you helped, who you protected. I'm not my father, I left that world behind, but I carry his name, and sometimes that's enough to make people look at me like I'm him. Cal set the page down and ran both hands through his hair, exhaling slowly. He wasn't angry. Surprisingly, he wasn't angry. If Mira had told him all this the first night, the connection to the man who'd bankrupted his family, the legacy she'd inherited, he might have reacted differently. He couldn't lie to himself about that, but now, after knowing her, after watching her feed her children from trembling hands and share his kitchen without pride or pretense, he couldn't picture her in that world, couldn't imagine her using her father's money as anything other than an apology written in kindness. It wasn't about the past anymore, it was about what she had chosen to do with it. The next day, Cal sat at the kitchen table with Eli, watching him smear too much peanut butter on a slice of toast. Do you remember what Mira said about her last name? Cal asked. Eli nodded without looking up. Holloway. Cal hesitated. Do you know who else was a Holloway? Eli paused, then shook his head. No. Should I? Her father. He was the one who opened all those stations years ago. The ones that hurt our business. Hurt Grandpa. Eli looked up now, eyes thoughtful. Are we mad at her? Cal smiled, faintly. No, Bud, we're not. Why not? Because she didn't do what he did. She walked away from all of it, tried to build something better. Eli seemed to consider that, then nodded and went back to his toast. Good. She was nice. Cal ruffled his hair. Yeah, she was. That afternoon, he returned to the garage and finally opened the envelope Mira had tucked inside the letter, the one he'd set aside, unsure if he'd ever touch. Inside was a single key and an address. Cranford Lake, Willow and 5th. Back of the bakery. Cal had never been to Cranford Lake, but he knew of it. About an hour east, a lakeside town with antique shops, art galleries and bakeries that made too much out of cinnamon. People went there for second honeymoons or retirement weekends. The idea that Mira had chosen that place as her landing spot. It felt right. She wasn't hiding. She was starting over. At the bottom of the note, another line. If you ever want to see us again, come by, no pressure, but the door will be open. Cal stared at the key, warm in his palm despite the cold around him. He hadn't expected an invitation, hadn't realized how much he'd wanted one. That evening, after closing up the garage and checking the forecast, Cal found himself standing at the edge of the attic. The old boxes of Mara's things were still there, untouched for years. He didn't open them, just stood in the quiet, breathing in the memory. I miss you, he whispered, but it didn't ache the same way it used to. Something in his heart had softened, not as a forgetting, but as a releasing. There was still love there, still memory, but now beside it was room for something else, something new. Downstairs, Eli was packing a bag, just in case, he said, holding up a comic book and a granola bar. If we go somewhere. Cal knelt beside him. Where would we go? Eli grinned. To see the babies. Cal smiled. Maybe we will. And as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows over the snow-dusted roofs of Elk Hollow, Cal looked out the window and made a quiet promise to himself. He wasn't chasing anything. He wasn't running from anything. He was simply choosing, and that Mira had taught him made all the difference. The road to Cranford Lake was narrow and winding, flanked by tall pine trees, dusted with the last breath of winter. Cal hadn't driven this far east in over a year, and never with something to find. His hands rested easy on the wheel, but his chest was tight with a strange mix of nerves and calm, the kind of emotion that settles in when you realize you're walking towards something that could change everything. Eli sat in the passenger seat, legs swinging as he stared out the window. Rufus snored softly in the back, curled in a worn blanket. The boy had insisted on bringing the dog for emotional support, as he'd said with mock seriousness. They'd left early, just after sunrise. Cal had closed the garage for the day, posted a note on the door. Back tomorrow, helping a friend. It was the first time in years he'd given himself permission to step away, not because of emergency, not because of breakdowns, but because of choice. "Do you think she'll be there?" Eli asked, not looking away from the trees rushing by. "I don't know," Cal replied honestly. "But I hope so." Eli nodded, then rested his head against the window. "I think she will be." Cranford Lake looked like a postcard. Brick sidewalks, white picket fences, shops with flower boxes even in late winter. The lake itself shimmered at the edge of town, surrounded by park benches and weeping willows just beginning to wake from their long sleep. Cal followed the address Mira had written, turning down a quiet side street until he spotted a narrow sign tucked behind a bakery with a hand-painted wooden placard, "Willow and Fifth Cafe." There was a small courtyard in the back, stone-paved, with wrought-iron chairs and strings of lights that probably looked magical at night. Cal parked the truck, cut the engine and sat still for a moment. Eli was already halfway unbuckled. "Are we going in?" Cal glanced at him. "Yeah, buddy, we're going in." The back door to the cafe opened with the soft jingle of a bell. Inside, the space was warm and inviting, with the smell of cinnamon and honey in the air. A few early customers sipped coffee at rustic wooden tables, and behind the counter stood a woman with flour on her cheek, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She looked up at the sound of the bell, and for a moment, just a moment, her whole face. "It changed. Mira," Cal said, his voice barely above a breath. She froze, wide-eyed, her hand hovering over a tray of fresh scones. Then slowly, a smile broke across her face, small, incredulous but real. "You came." "I told you," he said, stepping closer. "I don't run from things." She wiped her hands on her apron, her gaze flicking between him and Eli, who gave her a small wave from behind his father's leg. "Hi, Mira," he said. "We brought Rufus, too." Mira laughed, and Cal thought it might be the most beautiful sound he'd heard in weeks. They sat at a corner table, the late morning sun filtering in through the window panes. Mira brought hot chocolate for Eli, coffee for Cal, and a plate of warm banana bread that disappeared quickly. "How long have you been here?" Cal asked. 2 weeks, she said. "The owner's a friend of a friend. She needed help with the bakery. I needed a roof and a kitchen. It worked out. And the boys? Sleeping in the back. There's a nursery space, quiet during mornings." Cal nodded, unsure how to ask the question he really wanted to. She answered it anyway. "I didn't leave because I didn't trust you," Mira said. "Or because I was scared. Then why? Because I needed to know that the safety I felt wasn't borrowed," she said. "That I could make a place for myself again, not just hide in yours." Cal was quiet. Then, "You did. This place feels right," Mira smiled softly. "It's not forever, but it's mine for now." There was a beat of silence between them, heavy with meaning, something unsaid, but no longer ignored. "I miss you," Cal said. "I missed you too." After they walked through the little back courtyard, Eli tugging Mira's hand, pointing out which trees would be best for a treehouse, Cal found himself standing beside her, watching the light shift across the cafe windows. Eli asked me, "If we were mad at you," he said. She stilled, as I told him no, that you did what you had to do, and that you left us a gift, one we'll never forget. Mira turned toward him, her eyes shining. "I didn't want it to feel like payment." "It didn't," he said. "It felt like something else, like faith." Mira took a breath. "I still have the key," Cal smiled. "So do I." They stood in the stillness, the air between them warm despite the lingering chill. "I don't want to come here just once," he said finally. "I want this to be something we build, together, however slow, however long it takes." Mira's lip trembled. "Even after knowing who I am?" "I know who you are," Cal said. "You're not your father. You're not a name. You're a woman who walked through fire carrying 2 babies and still had the strength to be kind." She took a step closer. "And you're the man who opened his door when I had nowhere else to go." They stood inches apart now, hearts exposed, and in that quiet moment, neither needed to speak the rest. As they returned to the front of the cafe, Jude's cry echoed from the nursery room. Mira excused herself, and Cal watched her disappear behind the curtain with the calm assurance of someone who belonged there. Eli reached up, taking his father's hand. "Are we staying?" Cal looked down, smiled. "If she'll have us, yeah, I think we are." That night, as they drove home beneath a sky painted in rose and gold, Cal rolled down the window and let the wind rush through the truck. The key Mira had given him sat on the dashboard, a symbol of something he hadn't expected, but now couldn't imagine letting go. Sometimes life came down to a single moment. An open door, a quiet letter, a choice, and Cal had made his. Not because he needed saving, not because she did, but because some things, some people are worth choosing again and again. The table by the window wasn't anything special. It wobbled slightly if you leaned on the left side too hard, and the varnish had worn thin where years of elbows had rested. But every morning, light poured through the wide pane glass and painted. The wood in gold, and the warmth of cinnamon and fresh bread hung in the air like a welcome home sign that never needed to be taken down. Mira had chosen this table months ago when she'd first started working at Willow and Fifth Cafe. It wasn't the biggest or the prettiest, but it offered a perfect view of the lake in the distance, and from it she could watch the town begin its slow stretch into morning. Most days, it sat empty until the lunch crowd arrived. But today, it wasn't empty. Today, it held 4 coffee cups, 2 half-eaten muffins, 1 sleepy-eyed dog, and a kind of quiet only possible when people feel safe in each other's company. Eli leaned forward, chin on his hands, watching the boats bob gently. In the lake beyond, Jude sat on Mira's hip, gnawing on a teething ring. Micah dozed in the stroller beside her, and Cal sat across from them, sipping his coffee, his eyes drifting to Mira in that way that said, "Everything's right here. No rush, no tension, just presence, the kind people search their whole lives for and rarely recognize until it's sitting across from them at a slightly wobbly cafe table." "I think we should fix that leg," Cal said, tapping his boot against the table's base. Mira smiled. "You say that every time." "And I mean it every time." She raised an eyebrow. "You're going to turn my whole cafe into a garage if I'm not careful." Cal grinned. "Some things deserve better maintenance." Eli perked up. "Can we build something here, like a playhouse out back or a tree fort?" Mira laughed, brushing hair from Jude's forehead. "There are no trees in the courtyard." Eli looked undeterred. "Then maybe a sandbox or a doghouse for Rufus." Rufus, half asleep under the table, thumped his tail once in sleepy agreement. Cal leaned back, looking at Mira. "What do you think?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned to the window. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the cafe in light, catching in the strands of her hair and the curve of her cheek. She looked different these days, not in some dramatic movie makeover way, but lighter, like someone who'd stopped carrying. "A backpack full of ghosts, I think," she said slowly. "We can build something, not just a sandbox." Cal watched her, heart quiet but full. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." Life didn't return to normal. It became something better. Cal didn't move to Cranford Lake right away, but he started spending weekends there, then more. He helped with repairs around the cafe, added shelves in the back storage room, fixed a squeaky oven door. Eli quickly made friends at the lake's small school and declared himself an official big brother in training. Mira took things slow. She always had one foot on the ground, as if part of her still feared the wind might change and carry it all away. But over time, she let herself lean more. One evening, a month after Cal's visit, she stood behind the counter and found him at his usual seat, table by the window, coffee in hand, eyes on the lake. She walked over, apron still dusted with flour. "Busy day at the shop?" He shrugged. "Not as busy as here. Your banana bread's giving my oil changers a run for their money." She sat across from him. "You ever think you'd be spending this much time in a bakery?" Cal looked at her, his smile warm and sure. "Not once, and I wouldn't change it." They fell into a familiar, comfortable silence. Then Mira pulled something small from her apron pocket and slid it across the table, a spare key. Cal blinked, then looked at her. "I figured," she said softly. "It's about time you stopped knocking." His hand closed over the key, and something in his chest settled. It wasn't a declaration, it was a beginning. Weeks turned to months, spring melted into summer, and with it came new rhythms, shared breakfasts, park strolls, early evenings on the cafe patio, Cal teaching Eli how to ride, a bike down the winding lake trails. Mira planted herbs in the courtyard with the twins, and on quiet days, she and Cal would sit side by side, watching them giggle in the shade. Sometimes they'd talk about the past, not with pain, but with reverence. Both had lived lives shaped by grief, by loss, by choices made in moments too fragile to hold, but they didn't dwell there. They had new stories now, shared ones. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the cafe windows with amber light, Cal pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It was a drawing, childlike and colorful. He handed it to Mira. She opened it to find a crayon sketch of 5 stick figures, a tall man, a woman with long hair, a boy with a cape, and 2 smaller figures in matching hats. In the corner, Rufus slept under a tree, above them in crooked handwriting, "Our family." Signed, Eli. Mira blinked, then brought a hand to her mouth. Her eyes glistened. "I didn't ask him to draw it," Cal said gently. "He just did." Mira nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. But it was true. And sometimes that was more than enough. Months later, the cafe would become known not just for its pastries but for its story. A story of a woman who built something out of broken pieces, a mechanic who fixed more than just engines, a boy who gave away his favorite rabbit, and 2 babies who reminded everyone that the smallest lives can carry the deepest truths. But long before it became law in a town too small for secrets, it was simply this: a table by the window, a cup of coffee passed between friends, and the quiet knowing that this finally was home. If you've made it this far, thank you truly. I hope this story touched your heart as much as it touched mine while telling it. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know your city, your country, or maybe even what part of the story meant the most to you. And if you enjoy gentle healing stories like this one, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on the notification bell, so you'll always know when the next story is waiting for you. Your support means the world. From my heart to yours, thank you for spending your time here. Until next time, take care and keep believing in kindness.